Hello, mellow fellows. It's Tier here, but my friends call me Steliocancos. That may be a lie, but you have no proof. American Dad is one of my comfort shows along with Bob's Burgers. American Dad is a good, consistent show that sadly gets overlooked when talking about adult animation. Because of its controversial sister show, who shall not be named, it often gets misjudged as a watered-down spin-off. However, in my opinion, it's a far superior show that cares about its characters and its audience. American Dad isn't super judgmental or mean-spirited like It Who Shall Not Be Named. They often celebrate the Smith family and emphasizes the importance of their bond. What I like about American Dad the most is that it's ever changing. People get married, divorced, people adopt kids, people die, or in some cases keep coming back to life. The point is, the town is ever evolving. Something that's always changing is Steve's love life. He has had a lot of love interest through the show. Steve is charming and sweet. Even though he's a dorky kid, he's not presented as totally undesirable like Meg is. He's had some actual successful romances and has a lot of epic fails too. Today I want to talk about Steve's longest relationship with Debbie Hyman, a girl so edgy that her last name might get me demonetized. Who is Debbie, you may ask? Well, Debbie is Steve's first long-term girlfriend who was introduced in season 2. I say long-term, but on and off girlfriend might be the more appropriate label. Debbie is our gothic queen of the show. She's artsy, likes old books, and can shoot eyeballs off of squirrels. Gothic literature is her favorite genre, obviously. Apparently, she is an actress too. She played Lady Macbeth in a school play, and according to Steve, she may smell like glue sticks, but she's anything but basic. Steve first met Debbie while trying to escape gym class. Debbie was up in the vents reading books like she always does at gym. They start talking, and her fascination with death interests Steve. Her dark outlook on life and unconventional way of thinking intrigued him almost immediately. Steve fell in love right then and there, but he was too nervous to ask her out, so he told his dad. And what was Stan's solution, you may ask? Well, he strapped a bomb to his son's neck to force him to ask her out. It was supposed to be for 24 hours, but yeah, he accidentally said it way sooner, so Steve had to ask her out pretty much immediately. Yes, it was extreme, but you know what? It got the job done. He asked her out and she agreed to be his girlfriend. Their first date was in her favorite place, the graveyard. They were like literally making out with a funeral in the background. That is both disrespectfully creepy and iconic. Steve wasn't freaked out by this. He actually found it romantic. He likes that she's so unusual and fascinating. He literally describes her as sweet, beautiful, and freaky. Unsurprisingly, Steve was a sweet, loyal, and loving boyfriend. He was a perfect gentleman to her, and you know what? Francine raised him right. Steve, being a good boy, wanted to bring her home to meet his family, so he invited her over for dinner. Now this is where their problems start. Obviously, as you could tell, she is a plus-size gothic girl. Usually that doesn't matter in a loving relationship, especially to Steve, who likes her for who she is. Also, remember, this is Steve, so it's not like he could be that picky about who he dates. Obviously. However, Stan is an awful person. His father is very close-minded, and most of the time throughout the series, Stan is always learning lessons about how his ideals aren't always right. So of course, Stan did not like this. Being the awful, dramatic person he is, Stan freaks out at the sight of her and tries to forbid Steve from dating her. Steve obviously disregards his dad and left the panic room to be with Debbie. Yes, Stan has a panic room for really annoying situations like this. Stan was the only one who was against her at the moment. Francine and Haley were just excited Steve was bringing home a girl for the first time. Because again, it's Steve. We don't get moments like this often. The fact that he literally dragged his whole family into the panic room just shows how dramatic this man is. He literally banned Steve from seeing her because he didn't want his grandchildren to be, and I quote, half fat. Francine then pointed out Stan's hypocrisy for judging Debbie for her weight. Stan isn't exactly in shape either, so he can't really talk about a teenage girl's weight. Once she points this out, Stan goes down a shame spiral and starts working out insanely hard and eating next to nothing. Way less than he's supposed to. His extreme measures causes him to develop anorexia. However, because of his body dysmorphia, he couldn't recognize that he's dangerously underweight. He gets suspended from work and is forced into rehab by his family. Steve was worried about his father's health, so he believed that if he broke up with Debbie, that could help Stan's recovery somehow. So he broke up with her, and obviously he was crushed by this. It's his first breakup. However, after some events in the episode, Steve and Debbie end up getting back together at the end, and yay. The next Debbie-centered episode, things go back to the status quo in a way. Steve and Debbie are happily dating, but Stan is still mean to her. Debbie ignores most of the bullying towards her through the series, and she doesn't take anything anyone says to her to heart. Yes, it still hurts her feelings, but she's secure in herself and doesn't bother to change for anyone. Even after that whole episode about him struggling with his weight, he still treats Debbie badly because of her weight. He was more tolerant of her dating Steve in this episode, so he did change a little bit, but he still gave her a hard time. However, once she showed an interest in guns, Stan changed his tune immediately. The girl shot the eyeballs off of squirrels. She's a bit of a nutcase. Only then did Stan start to see her as an actual human being. All of a sudden, he was chill with her. Instead of insulting her and finding creative ways to call her overweight, all of a sudden, he didn't notice that she was a larger woman. His words, like the gaslighting. What? You were bullying her for like an episode and a half and now you don't know? Whatever. However, this episode is where Francine starts to have a problem with Debbie. You see, Debbie packed lunch for Steve, and he decided to take Debbie's lunch to school over the lunch that Francine made for him. What you have to understand about Steve is that he is a mama's boy. He loves his mother and holds her to the highest regard. Of course, Francine loves this and continues to baby him. She is very, very close to Steve, and sometimes her and Steve have very unhealthy mother-son dynamics to where she spoils him and gives him what he wants and indulges him because Stan is so hard on Steve that Francine feels like she needs to compensate by being the loving mother. So their relationship is very good, but sometimes it's too obsessive. And this episode is a clear example of when Francine feels her position in Steve's life has been threatened. Francine is used to Steve's undivided attention, so him getting a girlfriend isn't what bothered her. It's the fact that Steve started to prioritize Debbie over her that bothered her. Debbie is now classified as a threat in Francine's eyes. She started to freak out and overreact and started bullying Debbie, obviously the way Stan did. Not only that, she kind of started to intervene in their relationship. First, she ruined the scrapbook that Steve was making for Debbie. Then she went on a step further by planting drugs in his locker and getting him suspended so that he can stay home away from Debbie. When Steve figured out that she was the one who basically got him suspended, he was rightfully upset. Francine tried to explain herself, but she ended up just blaming everything she did on Debbie. He told her off and decided to distance himself from his mother, which, if you know Steve, is a huge thing for Steve to even utter. Steve, like I said, is a huge mother's boy. He loves his mom. He admires his mother. His mother is God in his eyes. So the fact that he even dared to distance himself from her, it broke Francine. Francine went through a whole crisis during this episode and even wanted to have another replacement baby for the sake of having another baby because she felt like she was losing her baby, aka Steve. Thankfully, by the end of the episode, Francine came to her senses and stopped acting like a crazy lady. Before she could really apologize to Steve or Debbie, Steve ran in the house and cried in her arms because Debbie dumped him for an unknown reason. We don't know why they broke up, but Francine ended up getting her way regardless. Francine even rubbed salt in the room by emphasizing to Steve and making it very clear that no other woman would love him more than his own mother. No one. Making sure that she was never ever replaced again. So obviously by the end of the episode, Francine decided not to have another baby, but at the same time, she was not held accountable, getting her son suspended or trying to ruin his relationship. So, this episode, Francine got off scot-free. But thankfully, that didn't last for long. Third time's the charm. Steve and Debbie ended up getting back together randomly a few episodes later with no explanation as to why they broke up or why they got back together. They were basically all over each other, and they're just back together, which I guess happens a lot in high school relationships. People break up and get back together all the time, but this is the third time. Maybe we should reassess, but it's cool. Steve and Debbie were making out under the bleachers and was noticeably more lovey-dovey than they have been in earlier episodes. He was also prioritizing Debbie over his friends this time and spent all of his time only with Debbie. Debbie was his world in this episode, and if you know anything about Steve, the other most important people in his life besides his family is his friends. His friend group is Toshi, Barry, and Snot. He's been the closest with Snot. So the fact that he's spending time with a person other than Snot in school is a bit surprising. But like I said, it seems like whenever Steve has a girlfriend, he tends to prioritize his relationship over the other relationships in his life, whether it be familial or in friendship. In this episode, Debbie was getting bullied hard and was constantly being picked on by the popular kids. Steve was constantly standing up for her against the bullies. Steve hardly ever protects himself or stands up to himself when it comes to bullies, but he is very protective over Debbie. So him standing up for her is a pretty big deal because he won't even stand up for himself. However, even though he was standing up for Debbie, she did not want him to. She wanted him to rise above instead of meeting those people at their level. I don't know who she thought she was dating. If I know anything, I know that there is no pettier family than the Smith family. They are all petty, every single member of the Smiths. Even Jeff. And he's a total sweetheart. I don't know who she thought she was kidding when she told Steve, of all people, probably the pettiest of them all, under his father, to not do anything about it. I'm just saying that was not the smartest character assessment. So to combat the bullying, Steve decided that the best route for Debbie to take is to run for president, because presidency equals power, which means that the popular kids would lay off of Debbie because they will want their policies pushed. He became a full-on campaign manager and completely threw himself into this. Steve was so into it that he neglected his friend group even more than he already was. He even forgotten Barry's birthday to run his campaign. He threw himself 110% into it and worked overtime to get her votes from different groups in the school. He was actually more focused than Debbie was. Debbie was more casual about running for presidency. She wasn't so concerned about winning the clicks over or changing her image. She was just doing it just to do it. Unfortunately, right before it was time to vote, a slam page was made about Debbie. The slam page was awful and was way harsher even for normal school bullying standards. Because of this, Debbie ended up losing to Lisa Silver, the popular cheerleader girl. Steve was rightfully furious about this page. Not only did they trash his girlfriend, who he cares so much for, all of a sudden his hard work that they were doing over these weeks was destroyed by one webpage. Steve believed that it was the 3 popular girls that's been picking on Debbie and decided to take action. He got revenge on all 3 of them in pretty gross ways. When Steve told Debbie what he did, he thought it would make her feel better. From his perspective, he was defending her honor. However, Debbie did not like that he did all those things. Even if he was defending her, she told him repeatedly not to fight back or play dirty. So you guessed it, she broke up with him because he didn't listen to what she wanted. He did sell Toshi's family sword to help fund his revenge schemes, so I guess he did go pretty far. Heartbroken, Steve runs to his friends crying like every teen does after a breakup. However, during this talk, they let it slip that they were the ones who actually posted and created that slam page. Maybe Toshi deserved to have his family heirloom sold. Like, what the hell was that? They purposely tanked Debbie's campaign to prevent Steve from becoming the first gentleman of the school. If he became first gentleman because of his presidential girlfriend, then he would have no time for them at all. Which is a valid point, but what they did to Debbie was very cruel. Steve was rightfully angry about their betrayal and didn't want to be friends with any of them anymore. However, before he can do his diva storm off and leave, the 3 girls that he took revenge on came out to hunt him down with a mob of students. Not only was Steve being hunted, they decided to beat up the whole friend group too. Just because. To make it worse, Principal Lewis put a $500 bounty on each one of them for messing with his daughter. Yeah, one of those 3 popular girls is Principal Lewis's daughter, which I was confused about, but you know what? We're just gonna roll with it. So the entire school was after all 4 of them at this point. They ran through different cliques' territories in order to escape. They were almost caught by the Goths, but Debbie stepped in to help Steve. Even though she was mad at him, seeing him hunted put things into perspective for her. She said it's easy to tell someone not to protect her, but when Steve was in trouble, she wanted to protect him. So she didn't agree with what he did, but she understood why he did it and how it felt for him to watch her get bullied. So she forgave them and was willing to take him back as her boyfriend. So they broke up for all of 3 minutes. She was going to just take Steve with her and leave his friends to get caught by the Goths, but Steve refused to leave without them. He learned through this whole ordeal, I don't know when he learned this, but he learned that he has to make time for his friends and his girlfriend and find a way to balance his time. He realized that he did not have to choose between them. Debbie decided to let them all go and distract the bullies with her Wednesday dancing. Ultimately, it didn't matter because they all got caught and beat up anyway by Lisa Silver's mob, but it ended in a nice way. However, I do think that the group should have at least apologized to Debbie for what they did, but you know, whatever. The next significant episode was Bar Mitzvah Hustle. At this point, Debbie and Steve were still dating by the beginning of this episode. However, things have noticeably changed in this episode. Steve seemed happy as ever, but Debbie isn't really into Steve anymore. You see, Debbie sees Steve as immature and was getting annoyed by it. I mean, he is a freshman in high school. They are feral. So, you know, I don't know what she was expecting. This is where you run into Snot and his friend Eitan. Eitan is Snot's study buddy for their upcoming bar mitzvahs. It turns out that Debbie already knows Eitan because she used to go to temple before she moved away from traditional religion, which confirms her Jewish heritage. I mean, I guess don't let Stan find out. Eitan flirted with Debbie almost immediately in front of Steve. Compared to Steve, he seems more mature and put together on the outside. So Debbie was feeling attracted to him. The grass always looks greener on the other side, I suppose. So yes, Steve was being a bit mature with his little fart machine this episode. But after everything they've been through, I thought it was kind of a dumb reason for them to break up. However, that's what happened. Eitan asked Debbie to be his date for his bar mitzvah, and she agreed before she even broke up with Steve yet, which is pretty rude and immature in itself. But anyway, yeah, they broke up. Steve, being as petty as he is, the petty king that he is, decided that revenge is in order. This is why I love this boy. He gets his heart broken, immediately someone has to pay for it. He absolutely was not going to let this slide. Steve's plan was to rob Eitan's bar mitzvah presents, and when he freaks out over it, Debbie would see how immature he is and come running back to Steve. At the party, Steve puts on a mature act and even convinces Debbie to dance with him during her date with Aton. Like, Steve's kind of smooth, honestly. After making Aton paranoid about his presence, Aton freaks out in front of his entire party over his presence and looks kind of like a spoiled brat. Unknown to him, the real con was stealing his birthday money and sneaking it out through Snot's jacket. Snot was not involved in his plan, and he had no idea that Steve was using him as a mule. Debbie is obviously turned off by Aton's fit and breaks up with him after one freaking date. As you can guess, she starts flirting again with Steve because he seems so mature. Even though this is the first time he's ever displayed that behavior, but it's fine, I guess. Whatever. Steve's plan was almost perfect. Almost. Unfortunately, the money was found in Snot's jacket, and he ended up being blamed for stealing the money. Like I said, he had no idea what was happening. As usual, Steve's plan backfired onto him. Aton took Snot to religious court, and the judge ruled to excommunicate Snot from the temple and have his bar mitzvah banned, so he would never become a man traditionally. Once Steve saw Snot was going to lose the most important birthday of his life, he came clean and confessed to planting the money in Snot's jacket. By telling the truth, he ended up sacrificing his relationship with Debbie to save his friend. Debbie, of course, was very disappointed in Steve, and she ended up dumping him for good this time. Snot was also upset for Steve for setting him up to be excommunicated and for him waiting so long to confess what he did. To make it up to Snot, Steve sold his toys and threw him a nice bar mitzvah in his backyard using that money, which is an upgrade for Snot because Snot was planning on having his bar mitzvah in a dirty park. So Steve's house was a better choice. Remember, Snot is dirt poor, so anything is good for Snot. And that marks the end of an era. Since this episode, Steve and Debbie have not interacted much at all. The relationship is over as of currently. There's definitely a possibility that she come back in his life, but it has been a long time since they've interacted in the show at all. I don't think the writers want to go back to his first girlfriend, and I think they just want to move Steve forward. Obviously, I do wish that she would pop up from time to time, but no, she's kind of in a background position right now. Steve has had other romantic options since Debbie, but he hasn't had another long-term girlfriend since. My favorite of his potential love interest is Allie from the latest season. She is funny, fun, and her and Steve has a really cute love story. I mean, the girl eats peppers just for fun, so they have a really interesting dynamic where she's kind of dry funny and, you know, she isn't open about her feelings, and Steve is a very soft, sweet guy, and they fuss a little bit, but it's kind of like opposites attract. And I really do think that they have a really nice story that can happen between them. She's a year older, but I do think that they are a good match. I really hope that she's not a one episode character because she has some real potential. I do think that Steve should have another girlfriend at some point. His boyfriend-centric episodes are hilarious because Steve is honestly really funny when he has a girlfriend, so I hope we get more of those. In conclusion, Steve and Debbie were such a cute couple. Who can resist the nerd-goth combination? Their relationship was fun to watch, and I enjoyed their time together. It was nice to see Steve as a loving boyfriend. Clearly, he knows how to treat a girl unlike his freaking father. I wish Debbie was still around as a friend of, but maybe it'll come up again in the future, who knows. I'm glad that Steve still is having new romantic experiences, even if they don't last long. Steve and Debbie had such an interesting relationship, and we got to see a new side of Steve that we've never seen before. We got to see how Steve is in a relationship and how he does with being a boyfriend. We've learned that Steve is a very supportive and kind and very involved boyfriend, and he'll be interested in you, interested in your interest, and would try to include you in his life as much as possible. Steve is really a good boyfriend. And that's rare. In animation is rare, okay? In teenage boys in animation, you usually don't see that. Usually they're trash. I mean, in real life they're trash too, but usually in animation they're not as good, especially as teenagers. But Steve is, I guess, an exception. We also learned that he is very overprotective and will keep his girl by any means necessary, including sabotaging your bar mitzvah. As far as Debbie goes, I liked her as a character. She was different and interesting as a person. We don't really see a lot of gothic characters in adult animation. And you know what? She was cool. Her character directly challenged some of our Smith family members' biases and challenged them to open their minds to new people. She taught Steve a few valuable lessons, and I'm happy that they got to be in a relationship, and I'm fine with how their relationship turned out the way it was. Even if it ended with them not being together, I am happy that their relationship existed. I hope that we get a new relationship storyline in the future so I can make some videos about it. I mean, I already love the journey that came with Haley and Jeff. Francine and Stan's ever-evolving love story is always hilarious. And we all love how many different relationships that Roger is involved in on a daily basis because of all of his personas. I just want to see Steve in another longer term relationship and see how he fares with a different girlfriend. Honestly, I'm just happy to see Steve thriving in any way. Anyway, I think that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you look forward to more Bob's Burgers and American Dad videos, and also a lot of other random stuff that I'm going to be talking about. I don't have a set list of anything. I'm just going to be doing random stuff. So hopefully you guys stick around for that. Anyways, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!